So today we're going to do something that you guys probably love to do. Haha. We're going to go through a genealogy. That's one of the reasons why I didn't send like a text message today. Because if I did, you might have people just say, "Oh, I'm taking that week off." So, hey, it's in the Word of God, right? It's in the Word of God, and it's really brilliant. I mean, it's really the only known ancient record that we have that far back in history, and I'm excited about it. But the thing that you have to understand when you're reading the Bible is that the Bible tends to focus on individuals or people that are important to the actual story of the Bible that's communicating. Remember, it's an ancient document. This is an ancient document. So, with that said, we're going to be looking at what we concluded with last week. If you recall last week, we ended with the blessing and curses of Abraham, right? It came to his sons. And so, just a refresher, it says, "Cursed be Canaan." And we know why Canaan was cursed, because Ham saw his father's, right? We know the story. And so basically, Ham doesn't get cursed. Who gets cursed? His son. Is his son born yet? Son's not even born yet. So his son gets cursed and not Ham. That's important to know as we look at this. So what is the curse of Canaan, his son? He's going to be a servant of servants, and he shall be so to his brothers. Okay? And then the next thing that Abraham does is he talks to Shem, and Shem is actually going to be from where the Hebrews and Abraham and all those folks come from. And he doesn't bless Shem, he blesses Yahweh. He said, "Blessed be the Lord Yahweh." Why? Because he's the God of Shem. And so you have to know right off the bat, it's being communicated, this idea that you got to follow Shem, right? You got to follow Shem because he's the God of Shem. And let Canaan be a servant. There we go again, servanthood. May God enlarge Japheth. May he expand his territory. And let him dwell in the tents of Shem. So Japheth, when you look at this section right here, it's like, well, what does it mean to dwell in the tents of his brother? Does that mean that there's going to be servitude with Japheth as well? That's the questions that we're going to look at today as we go through this table of nations here. And he says, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan be his servant, right? So Canaan, is basically pronounced cursed before he was even born. God had established this is going to be the pattern. Now, when we look at these genealogies, when you're doing a table of nations, put on a hat. Team Japheth, like, okay, this is Japheth, this is the territory that he represents. Team Shem, this is the territory. Team Ham. But understand this. Sometimes they do a switcheroo. Sometimes the good guys become the bad guys. Sometimes the bad guys become the good guys. And so just because somebody is a child of God, remember they use that against Jesus, the religious leaders? We are children of Abraham. And God's like, no, you have your father, the devil. And Paul in Romans talked about what a Jewish person is, right? A Jewish person, a Jewish man named Paul, told the Jews that a Jew is not one outwardly, but one inwardly. And so this kind of sets up the stage for God will use anybody. He'll use people that come from a bad lineage and a good lineage. The most important thing is that you follow God, okay? Important to know that. So if you come from a bad set of bad circumstance, bad background. And if you turn your head towards God to follow him, God will use you. Absolutely use you. All right, you ready? Okay. I'll try to make this painless, okay? I'm going to be sensing around, kind of feeling around. So sons are born. Now they're gone from the ark, and their task is to multiply and be fruitful. Okay, so the sons of Japheth. The sons of Japheth are Gomer, Magog, Madai, Juvan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. Japheth is going to be representing Europe, by the way. So it's just so important to put this in your mind, okay? So you see like Gomer, for example. We know that name in the Bible, Gomer, you know. But it really represents kind of in the area of Russia, Europe kind of thing. Magog. How many people have heard of Magog? Those of you that go through Revelation talk about Gog and Magog, and then Ezekiel talks about Gog and Magog, but Ezekiel seems to be saying that, you know, Gog is a dude that lives in Magog. And so many people are wondering who's going to be Gog and Magog at the end of the times. And then you got Madai. And one of the reasons why this talk is relevant is because currently, as we know, Iran has been at war with Israel. They've been bombing each other and so forth like that. Well, Madai is where Persia is. It's where Iran is. They're actually connected to the Medes, the Persian Medes. And so there was a time when we had a great relationship with the Persians. Think about the Jews, for example, when they were exiles. They were exiled into Babylon. And who was it that came in and conquered the Babylonians and then told Daniel and told people like Nehemiah, and who were it that said, you guys can go back and rebuild your walls and you can rebuild your temple? It was the Persians. And so a lot of times we look at like what's going on in Iran now, and we tend to think that we've always had bad relationships with Iran, but it's not really true. It's really when you kind of do some history on it, it's like when the Shah was exiled and Ayatollah Khomeini came in, then it seems like forever. It seems like we've been at war with them forever, but we actually had good relationships with them. So again, that's kind of the example of people can change. People can be good. People can be bad. No one is self-appointed. You don't have a choice, okay? And then Tubal, Meshach, and Tiras. And then he talks about the 7 sons of Japheth, okay? And the sons are Gomer, Ashkenaz, Rephaim, Togarmah, the sons of Javan, Elishash, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. Okay, that's a mouthful, but that is the 7 grandsons of Japheth. And one of the things that I want to mention is that when they're talking about the sons of Japheth, they mention Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras, right? But when it comes to the grandsons that they're going to acknowledge, it's only going to be the sons of Gomer and the sons of Javan. So all the other ones there aren't going to be listed there. So again, this does not represent every nation, but the author focuses on specific people that are going to be pertinent to the story of Israel. And from these come the coastline people spread in the lands, each with its own language, in their clans and their nations. And so if you look at a map, you kind of see that this area in red, kind of reddish maroonish, this is the area of Japheth, okay? And probably the most interesting thing about Japheth, that region and area there, is that when Paul the Apostle is reading scriptures, before he set on his missionary journey, this is essentially Asia Minor and Europe right there. That's where Paul goes on his missionary journeys. It's like you can trace just the trips and the directions that he's gone, and you can kind of see where he's headed. And so it's just important to know that when you look at Asia Minor, when you look at Japheth, if you have the hat on that says J, oh yeah, this is where Paul went. Paul went and spent a lot of time going through those specific regions in there. Europe, and just important to know that. And then the coastal islands there are Kittim, Elisha, and these are the areas, again, that represent Japheth. Okay? Okay. You've gotten through Japheth. There's not much on Japheth. Why is that? Because for the most part, Japheth is not part of the story. For the most part. And so, and then also they're being spread out to Europe, right? So there's probably kind of a loss of contact with some of these individuals. And that's why Paul, reading the Bible, and said, you know what? They talk a lot about Shem, and they talk a lot about Ham, but Japheth didn't get very much press. It's one of the reasons why he's motivated to go there, okay? So, and here are the sons of Ham. And remember, his son was cursed, right? And when you look at this list, you're just going to say, oh my goodness, these are all Israel's enemies. Let's look at this, okay? So the sons of Ham were Cush. That's the Ethiopians. Egypt, Put, and Canaan. How about that for 4 sons? With the exception of Cush, these other ones really play a prominent role when it comes to Israel's history, right? Okay, so 7 sons and grandsons of Cush are Seba, Havilah, Sabata, Rama, and Sabatka. And the sons of Rama are Sheba and Dedan. Again, Cush, this is the Ethiopian territory right there. Now, when they're writing this, you'll notice always a pattern. There'll be like a list of names, a list of regions that are there, and then there's always a little kind of narrative that's kind of thrown in there because, again, this is important for the person that's reading this. This is a highlight that he wants to highlight, okay? And he says this about Cush. Cush fathered Nimrod, and his name in the Hebrew means we will rebel. Okay? So it kind of gives you an idea of what kind of person Nimrod is going to be. Okay? In fact, he was the first on earth to be a mighty man. And he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. This was a saying that was going around, okay? So what is the message that's being communicated? This is somebody that's going to rebel. Somebody that's going to rebel against God. He is a very famous builder, and he was the first of the kingdoms. And so he is like going to be the antagonist when it comes to God's people and just God himself. In fact, next week when we go to the Tower of Babel, he's going to be a key feature because it's going to be on the plains of Shinar. Okay? So when it comes to Nimrod, this is what they want you to know. Okay? So first of all, his name means we will rebel. He's the first on the earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom, look at his kingdoms now, Babel. Does that sound familiar? Babel. Again, it's a foreshadow of what's going to be coming up there. Babel, Erech, Acadia, Canaanite. And where is it at? It's in the land of Shinar. Again, it's setting everything up for this Tower of Babel incident that's going to be happening, right? So this guy was a massive builder. He was one of the most... he was like Alexander the Great during his day. I mean, he was able to conquer territories. He was a hunter, and they grabbed territory by force. Okay, so it says from that land, okay, if that wasn't enough in the region of Shinar, if it wasn't enough to have Babel there, it says he goes to the land into Assyria, and look what he built. He built what? Nineveh. Rehoboth, Calah, and resident between Nineveh and Calah, that is the great city. Question. Daryl might know this answer. Where was the great city known as in the Bible? The great city wasn't Tarshish. I heard Tarshish. Nineveh. Nineveh was known as the great city. Tarshish was where Jonah wanted to go. Remember? God said, go to Nineveh, and I want you to go ahead and tell them that in 40 days I'm going to destroy them. And Jonah went to Tarshish, which is far away. As far away as you could get. He went as far west, and Nineveh is in the east. So it's interesting, that whole story there, because as that story plays out, you get kind of a switching of hats. Because who's supposed to be the good guy in the story of Jonah? It's supposed to be Jonah. Who's supposed to be the bad guy? All those notorious Ninevites. But as we know, the rest of the story goes, it just shows you that just because you're part of a bad group, maybe that has done monstrosity of evil, brutal, violent, you can call the name of the Lord, and the Lord will say, come. Is that encouraging to us? Like, no matter what we do, how much we rebel, we might be ashamed before people, but God says, you know, you're made in my image. And if you contact me, if you tell me, you know what, I want to change my ways, the doorway is open. That's the God that we serve. And this table of nations is just trying to communicate this, because God has a heart for every one of these nations. Every one of them. So as we continue the list with Ham, I couldn't fit this all on one PowerPoint. All of a sudden now there are more people that are familiar to the biblical reader, right? There are those that are in Egypt. Do we know of any story where God's people were being persecuted in Egypt? Do we know of any story? Of course we do, right? Moses, Israel, killing of children, labor task. God had to use Israel to overpower the most powerful nation at the time. And so again, these names are very familiar as you're reading this. So you have Egypt, fathered Liddim, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtali, Perushim, Karushim. And then, just in case you didn't know it, this is where the Philistines came from. But they weren't descendants of the Philistines. They weren't descendants of Egypt. They just happened to kind of come into the territory. And so, do the Philistines and the Israelites have a good relationship? So when you look at this list, these are all the people that are associated with Ham. He's got Assyria, he's got Nineveh, Assyria and Babylon. Have they been on good terms with Israel in the past, in the Bible account, in the Hebrew Bible? Well, what did they do? They split Israel in half, right? One deported the northern tribe, Assyria, and Babylon came and deported the southern tribe. And so these are all people that are associated with Ham, his son was cursed. So I kind of think that's interesting as you kind of go through this a little bit. And then the 12 sons of Canaan. And this is just ironic, right? Because Canaan is one of them. But Canaan fathered Siddim, And his firstborn was Heth. And the Jebusites and the Amorites and the Girgashites and the Hivites and the Archites and the Sinites and the Arvadites, the Zemarites and the Hamarathites. Afterwards, the clans of Canaan dispersed. Again, why is this interesting? Who is going to encounter the 12 sons of Canaan? Well, Israel has 12 tribes of Israel, and here you have the 12 sons of Canaan, okay? And what do we know about Canaan from Noah's prophecy? Canaan will serve. He will serve his brothers, right? He will serve his brothers. And so you're just kind of seeing the beginning stages of this. And perhaps, because Ham waited till his fourth son before he named him Canaan. He waited till his fourth son. And I wonder sometimes if he told his son, hey, it's prophesied that we're going to be serving Shem. So the Canaanites were the group of people that just, they went to the land of Canaan, and that was known as the Promised Land. And so, again, you can see all these connections here. They're fascinating. And then there's another narrative right there. Okay, it says, and the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar and as far as Gaza, and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zebulun, as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham by the clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. Now, how many people here would say that Ham's descendants are the bad people? How many would say, like, these are the enemies of Israel, these are the enemies of God's people? And we know the stories in the Bible, right? They practice different kind of religious practices. They have, temple prostitutes. They're worshiping on the high places. Sometimes they're combining Israelite worship with the nations kind of worship. Like, these are going to be the big stench when it comes to Israel becoming all that they are. And one of the things that I want to mention just is, unfortunately, this has been used in history against people that are descendants of Ham. And I'm specifically talking about because what Ham is connected, if you look on the map here, what Ham is connected to is he's connected to Africa. That's where most of his descendants are from. And again, there's the 12 tribes are up in the Canaan region. But this is the area that is consistently been considered like just bad influences. And in history of our country, they actually use this to promote racism. They actually use this to promote one being as superior to other beings. But what I'm trying to communicate is that it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter if you come from a bad lineage. What matters is your heart towards God. And unfortunately, there has been a lot of pain and a lot of hurt, and a lot of that pain and hurt, it still goes on. But I just want to really make people understand is that this was used in a negative way. Oh, you guys are the people of Ham. We know about Ham and how they were cursed. So just a little side note there. But so the region of Ham really mostly focuses on Africa. You got some in the Arabian desert there on the corner. And again, this is just how things are developing as, that they talk about the table of nations here. Pretty cool, huh? These guys are getting their own continents. Pretty cool. All right, and then we get to the sons of Shem. See, this has not been that difficult, or hopefully. You guys are listening to this. But so Shem. Shem is the one that everybody's waiting for if you're a Hebrew reader. Like, when's our people going to come? So Shem was the father of Eber. And Eber, if you put an H and an E and a W and an S, kind of get the idea what that word means. It's Hebrew. It's where we get the word Hebrews from. It's from Eber, okay? The 12 sons and grandsons of Shem until Peleg. And Peleg is going to get a narrative there because it's important when you understand where Peleg is, okay? So it says that that his sons, the 12 sons and grandsons of Peleg, before Peleg was Elam. Elam represents Iran, again, just so that you know that. Ashur represents Assyria. Arpachshad represents kind of that same region in Assyria. Lud and Aram, all in that same kind of region right there. And then Uz and Hol and Gether and Mash. Aparshashad, Shelah and Eber. And then Eber, it says later on, he had Peleg, okay? So remember that name, Peleg, okay? So this is what the narrative says here. It says, just so you know, reader, in case you fell asleep when you're reading this genealogy, to Eber were born 2 sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. And his brother's name was Joktan. Okay? So in the Bible narrative, like all throughout the Hebrew Bible, there's these sibling rivalries that kind of happen and kind of take place, right? We see these rivalries sometimes with the women that are getting pregnant, right? Like Sarah and her maidservant. Or Rachel was jealous of Leah. Basically, there's a lot of rivalry, right? Cain and Abel, sibling rivalry there. Seems to happen with Ham when he sees his father's nakedness and he brags about it. Seems to indicate kind of this like, are you going to be on my team or are you going to be on your dad's team? They walked backwards with the blanket because they said, we're going to be on dad's team. But again, there's division there. So division is going to be used in a sense that the nations will be dispersed, but also they're going to be going to different regions here. And so the author wants you to understand that Peleg is important here because of what happened to him. And just towards the end, as this focuses out, it says, Joktan fathered Alamad, Shephal, Hamazaveth, and Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Dikla, Ola, Abimal, Sheba. Sheba, we've heard of the place of Sheba, haven't we? Okay, Queen of Sheba. Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. And then there's a narrative about the dwelling spots of Joktan's offspring. It says, the territory in which they lived extended from Mesha to the direction of Sephar to the hill country of the east, and the sons of Shem by their clans and their languages, their lands, and their nations. These are the clans of Noah according to the genealogies in their nations, and these nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. Now, this is remarkable. I can't emphasize that enough. It is an ancient document that's taking records. It's the earliest recorded kind of history we have of someone devoting their time to say, this is how things were dispersed. And it's important for God's people as well because, you know, they hear about the story and you hear how people saying, did Noah's sons really populate the earth? And it's like the author goes through great detail to tell you what region they were from, to help you to recognize enemies of them, and that they continue to prevail. It's just important. And again, it's setting up the Tower of Babel now that you know that there are 70 nations that are there. And so on your map, again, you have Ham that really represents Africa. You have Shem that represents Asia, Western Asia specifically, and kind of the Persian area. So that's the territory that Israel is in. Israel is technically in Western Asia. And then Japheth, of course, was on the top, and he represents Europe and Asia Minor, kind of in the Turkey area right there. So this is how the land has been divided. That's what the Table of Nations is trying to communicate to you. And I just want to make a couple more points just to kind of tie this whole thing together, okay? And first of all, I want to talk about Eber's sons. Remember, Eber means Hebrew. Peleg, the Bible states that Abraham is a descendant of Peleg. Genesis chapter 11 specifically details the lineage from Peleg through Reu, Nahor, and Terah, ultimately leading to Abraham. That's why the author wanted you to know that afterwards he had Peleg, because Peleg is going to be the lineage that Abraham's going to come into. And so after the Tower of Nations begins the story of Abraham, and he's in one of those places that nobody wants to go to in Uz. Okay? So which line are we going to follow as Bible readers? We're going to follow the line of Peleg. Okay? Hoping that you guys are getting something out of this, because most of us ignore that chapter, or most of us read it and skim it. But here's kind of the overview right here. Shem represents Asia, okay? Western Asia specifically in this area here, and there's a bunch of religious fervor that's going around. So you have places like Elam, which is Persia, Iran. You have Assyria. You have Arphaxad. That's all part of that same region there. And you have people that are competing with God, with religion, and trying to basically pass it on to the generations, other climes, other tribes, conquest kind of thing, okay? So they're known as the religious fervor, and that's where Canaan is, and that's where Israel eventually gets the promised land. In the midst of all that turbulence, like, thanks God, you want me to live there? Yes, because I want you to be a witness to people that have not followed God. Japheth represents Europe. And Europe is this intellectual kind of place. You know, the Greeks, my people, Javan, by the way, that's the Greek people. I forgot to mention that. Gomar, Magog, kind of like in Ukraine area. Madai, Jubal, Tubal, Meshach, Tyros. Okay, so basically they're known mostly for intellectual activity. And Ham is in Africa, and they were known as for physical endurance. Like the Ethiopians are recorded in the Bible as being very tall, and they're very athletic. And so Cush, Mizraim is a word in the Hebrew that means Egypt. Phut and Canaan. Okay, that's the broad overview. Okay, so we're coming to a close, because we got to go back to the curse and the blessings of Noah, right? What did he say at the very end, where we had this question, is that a good thing or a bad thing? He says that Japheth will dwell in the tents of Shem. And the question is that a bad thing or a good thing? Because it almost sounds like they're going to be the servants of Shem. Well, if you do a word study in the Bible, and I just got a couple words here, to dwell in the tents, it can mean division. It can mean a negative thing. Psalm 78:55, it says, Yahweh also drove out the nations before them, before Israel, and appointed them an inheritance by measurement, and made the tribes of Israel dwell in their tents. Okay? So it's division in that sense. But it can be used as unity as well. And it says, I long to dwell in your tent forever and take refuge in the shelter of your wings. This verse expresses a desire to be in God's presence, dwelling in his tent, Do y'all want to dwell in God's tent? Which symbolizes the place of divine worship and safety. Okay? So when it comes to the brother of Japheth, it is used in a sense of a good thing because these are blessings that Noah is giving his son, and Japheth is to enlarge the earth and always be under the umbrella of God's people. And then this is how I close this thing. God loves the nations. And some of the conflicts that we see happening today, with bunker bombs being dropped and missiles being fired and Ukraine and Russia and everything that's happened, there's a lot of tension in the nations today. There's a lot of hardship. There's a lot of hatred that's going around. Not even knowing who you are, but just because you're people. They hate your people. It doesn't matter who you are. And what I want to end with is just saying that none of this surprises God. I hear people talking about, are we going to get into World War III? I don't know, maybe. Maybe God uses that part of his second coming. But the point that God wants us all to understand is that no matter what's happening out there, God is not surprised. God is in control. And God will use people to win those folks to Jesus, just like he did back in the old days, to win people to Yahweh. God will use people. And I think for us, it's easy for us to hate other countries. I hate this country because they did this. When we don't really know who they are. We don't know them individually, you know. And everybody has a different take on this. We'll look at it from this perspective, but we tend to look at it from one perspective. Having said that, God's heart is for the nations to come together as one. And you have that beautiful passage in Revelations where it says every tongue, nation, tribe under heaven. And it says there were myriads and myriads and myriads of nations. Paul's heart, God said him, go to the nations. Tell people about Jesus. That's what God's heart is. And someone like Paul, who knew his Bible very well, would be able to reflect on a verse like this in Isaiah chapter 2. Isaiah says, in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains, right? God's place is going to be the high place. There's no one who's going to be able to trump God. And it will be exalted above the hills. And what does it say? And all the nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of God, to Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And it talks about God. It says, he will judge between the nations and he will settle disputes for many peoples. And then look what it says. Then they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Do we all long for that day? We long for that day, don't we? And that's what I want to close with, is what is being communicated here is that they're going to shape-shift their weapons. They're going to turn them from swords to kill people and turn them into tools to cultivate the garden, to eat together, to have fellowship together. It's going to be a beautiful place. You always have to have your mind of not the current situation as it is, and that dominates your thinking, but an understanding like God, you have already shared what's going to happen in the future. And by doing that, I would encourage you all to pray for the nations. To pray for the nations to come to Christ. And that's how I want to end today. And I'm done talking.